If I'm running a football team, Jameis Winston's not on that football team. You can't throw 30 interceptions. Hey, what? Run the football then. Do something.
He threw 5,100 yards. Of course you want him back.
Well, no, not of course you want him back.
There's beast mode and there's bust mode, and Jameis Winston is bust mode.
Well, you've seen how good he can be. He's got one thing. He costs you games.
There's so much good. You look at there's so much good, and there's so much outright terrible.
The 2019 regular season is over, and what a year it was. But just because most teams are retired to their couches until we start this beautiful cycle all over again in a few months, that doesn't mean that we're done working down here. No. Here in the QBIU, or Quarterback Investigations Unit, there's always questions unanswered, narratives unsupported, and a new string of clues laid to figure out who or what is murdering a team's potential. But the files we're paging through today, they aren't your usual homicide case, or the occasional self-destruction. It's something far more convoluted and much more difficult to crack. Today, we're sitting down to discuss the man behind countless heart palpitations all across the Tampa Bay area. A quarterback who walks the line between what the hell did I just watch and what the hell did I just watch, but in a good way. And there's only one man who can wear that label better than anybody else, and that's Jameis Winston. Undoubtedly the best quarterback in Buccaneers history, and yet likely the single most divisive player in their entire history as well. So today, it's our job to decide whether this man is guilty or innocent of being a draft bust 5 years into his career. Now, as some of you might know, I'm a self-admitted Bucs fan. Whether that's a good decision for my health or not, I care about the success of this team. So, while I have made a video before the season about my concerns with Winston and my hopes for growth under Bruce Arians, today we're going to wipe that whole slate clean and examine the good, bad, and ugly of 2019 for ourselves. But before we crack open an ice-cold bottle of justice, as you guys know, my good friend Roger isn't always a fan of what we do here on the channel. So thankfully, my even better friends at Dr. Squatch are sponsoring today's video. Quick question, do you bathe? Because, I certainly hope that you do, but even if you're regularly bathing yourself like a good upstanding citizen, it's a fact that using synthetic, mass-produced soap can easily cause you to leave your shower worse off than you entered, with harmful additives causing skin irritation and even having links to hormone disruptors and cancer. I'm not a doctor, full disclaimer, but these are not good things. So thankfully, Dr. Squatch provides a natural alternative with their products, soap that doesn't cut corners at your expense when it comes to staying fresh. They've got 10 different scents to choose from, and even thinking about comparing them to regular mass-produced brands is a good way to get yourself laughed at by anyone that's got nostrils. Me included, I also have nostrils. So if you're looking to up your shower game here in 2020, they offer bundles and subscription plans to keep you stocked up. So to get started, head down to the link below to get 30% off their best-selling pack plus free shipping. That includes their pine tar, cedar citrus, and my personal favorite gold moss scented bars, as well as a soap saver. So if you want to emerge from your shower smelling like the god of the forest, or the god of anywhere really, the link is down in the description. And thank you again to Dr. Squatch for sponsoring today's episode. So who is this Jameis Winston guy? Well, to those of you who haven't seen his highlights, or his highlights, the best way I can think to describe him is if in a game of Russian roulette, with each spin of the chamber, you could either win an all-expenses-paid trip to Hawaii, or still get shot with a bullet. That's to say that the highs are sky high, and the lows send you spiraling into a vow to never watch Bucs football again. Now, he's certainly been a controversial figure on and off the field, but when the team arrived in Winston's 5th season at the start of 2019, there was incredible optimism and hope that this was the year Jameis would turn a corner and start to consistently hit that potential he's flashed in him so regularly. Bruce Arians' offensive system seemed a perfect fit, the weapons around him had never been better, and the time was now to secure that long-term deal and show that he was the man to have under center for the foreseeable future. What followed was one of the most awe-inspiring seasons in NFL history. But now standing here at the end of it, it all feels like we're really no closer to getting a definitive answer on what the future of the famous Jameis era in Tampa is. The ceiling that many people were hoping for, well, we caught a glimpse of it in a stretch of 4 wins that led to swirling rumors that Winston was going to get another chance in 2020, but then there was a complete derailing at the hands of the Houston Texans, and then a storybook overtime pick 6 to end the season the very next week. It's an ending that is so perfectly fitting that it almost seems too cliche, and it sent a lot of the optimism crashing back to earth and leaving the bitter taste of having eaten a massive L in everyone's mouths. And it's not like we haven't come to expect some wild variance from Winston, but this year was truly something special. If Jameis Winston's whole career has been a long-running saga of Jekyll and Hyde quarterback play, 2019 was Jekyll and Hyde on incredible Hulk-level steroids. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but per Jameis Winston's own request...
You better check your sheet.
Alright, well let me just, So, Winston made history on both positive and negative fronts in 2019, in a variety of ways as well. The first and most notable was becoming the first quarterback in NFL history to throw 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions in the same season, with his 30 picks a full 9 ahead of Baker Mayfield in second place. His 7 pick sixes were also the most in NFL history, which means that the man spotted his opponents a total of 42 points as an offensive player. That sounds pretty terrible, and there's no way that you can keep someone that does that. Case closed, right? Well, this all came alongside a league-leading 5,109 passing yards and 33 passing touchdowns, which ranked second only to MVP frontrunner Lamar Jackson. It's only the 8th time that a quarterback has cracked 5,000 yards at all, and considering it was his first year in a new offensive system, those kind of numbers should more than warrant a new contract, right? So this is where the issue lies. There are 2 camps that are very much standing in opposition on whether or not it's the right idea to keep Jameis heading into the 2020 season. But the only people whose opinions on that decision really matter are the Buccaneers front office, and it's a huge decision to make in terms of what that means for where the franchise is headed. That decision ultimately amounts to either another leap of faith or an admission that the past 5 years of stringing along the fan base were just wasted. Neither of which sound particularly enticing when put that way. But I think to really get an idea for what decision would be the right one for the Buccaneers, we're going to need to examine the case for and against Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston has become something of an anti-hero in NFL circles this past season, hailed as a player that you love watching just as long as he isn't the quarterback for your team. I mean, just about everybody was rooting for Winston to eclipse that coveted 30-30 mark, and when he did with a walk-off pick 6 to end the season, the internet rejoiced with unity that's rarely seen as an entire sports fan base. But for Winston, that record-breaking amount of interceptions, good for 7th most all-time, is past inexcusable. You don't need a degree in analytics to know that's a tendency that actively works against his own team in any game, and has flat-out ended them more often than any franchise quarterback should be responsible for. Everyone understands how important the turnover battle is in winning a football game, because if you can't control the ball, you can't score or realistically keep your opponent from scoring. For example, here are the top 11 teams in turnover differential from 2019. Apart from the team that fielded Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges for most of the season, can anybody tell me what these teams all have in common? So, to get an idea of the impact Jameis's turnover bug has had on the Buccaneers, I went ahead and took all of Tampa Bay's giveaways away that came from a player that wasn't Jameis Winston, and created a new turnover differential that was only Jameis Winston's giveaways versus the other teams. So in 2019 games where Winston had turnovers equal to or less than the opposition, the Buccaneers were 6-3, and that includes a game that was lost on a missed 34-yard field goal as time expired against the Giants, and a shootout in Seattle that Russell Wilson won on the first possession of overtime. On the flip side, the Bucs were 1-6 in games where Jameis committed more turnovers than the other team, with a staggering differential of 26-7 in those matchups. That is not a way to get to or win in the playoffs no matter who you have around you. Obviously, the vast majority of these turnovers are Winston's incredible 30 interceptions in total. So, to try and understand how on earth a player can make such amazing on-a-string throws while also making decisions like a JV backup quarterback at times, I went ahead and looked back at all 30 of Jameis Winston's picks to determine whether or not they were really his fault or if this guy is just really, really unlucky. Something worth noting here, Carson Palmer recently did an interview with Rich Eisen where he discussed the difficulty of transitioning into a Bruce Arians offense, where there can be up to 400 play calls available in a given game, and option concepts that receivers don't decide on until the top of their routes. That's something that both Winston and his receivers were working on throughout the course of the year, so in any case where it appears there was a miscommunication on which route is supposed to be run, we're going to void that in the name of growing pains for the sake of the first year in the system. So, trying to be mostly generous here, let's just go through these interceptions rapid fire. Alright, so we have tallied up our blame for all of Jameis' interceptions just in a cursory way, and we've taken 11 off the board, but our final number is still third in the entire NFL, and that is not accounting for dropped interceptions or blameless interceptions that have come from other quarterbacks. So how can a quarterback as talented as Jameis continue to make these mistakes so consistently? Well, to put it in the most unscientific terms possible, Jameis occasionally develops an advanced case of Madden brain. You know how sometimes in football video games, regardless of how open you think a player is or how airtight your pre-snap read was, you just throw it straight to a blanketed receiver regardless because your brain shuts off? Yeah, that's an instant regret feeling of, oh my god, I can't believe I just did that just about everyone who has played Madden can relate to. I've seen that joke made in passing a couple of times before, but I honestly can't think of a better way to explain away all of those bad mistakes than just saying that he turns into a 13-year-old on his Xbox One for 4 or 5 plays every time he takes the field. He just seems to check out and make horrendous decisions that he would probably never make if given a second chance on the play, or at least throws that appear that way from poor placement, but neither are what you want from a 5th-year quarterback. There's obviously other factors involved in the Buccaneers' overall struggles, like the perpetually woeful kicking game, for example, so it would be irresponsible to say that Jameis is the only factor in winning or losing games with his decisions, since that's simply not the full story. But this is a dance we've done over and over and over again, and I don't really know if my brain is fully capable of handling it for yet another season. But there are 2 sides to every single story, and while there's definitely reason to doubt the potential for Winston to lead the Buccaneers to anything meaningful in the next few years, that doesn't mean that's the end of the argument. We've seen that Jameis Winston can move the ball downfield. His yards per attempt has been in the top 10 for each of the past 3 years, and he has more yardage to his name than any other quarterback at his age in NFL history at 25. For years now, there's been an ongoing, consistent argument that Jameis can succeed as a quarterback in the NFL, but due to the team he's on, he's held back by the players around him, and throughout his career, it's been no secret that help from his defense, offensive line, and running game hasn't exactly been easy to come by. If we exclude Winston's rookie year when he was learning the ropes in 2019, which we'll discuss in a moment, the Bucs have never ranked higher than 23rd in total defense and 15th in scoring defense, with the other 2 years being the complete bottom of the league just about. While that doesn't excuse the plethora of mistakes made, especially as Winston's career has continued on, the fact that Bruce Arians' staff has come in and shifted the tide for the better in that area certainly helps. Now let me elaborate. The first year for a head coach is definitely a learning experience for all parties. Players have to relearn schemes, entire languages of communication, how their role meshes with their teammates' roles, etc., etc. It's a process that can often take up to half a year or more in more complicated systems before things start to click. So the success of a first season shouldn't really necessarily be judged by the win and loss column, but by whether or not significant strides have been made to get to a better place than the team was at the start of the season. And in the case of Bruce Arians' first year in Tampa, that's exactly what has occurred. This defense is one that's needed a fundamental shift for a while now, and while Jason Light moved to bring in significant talent up front in past seasons, Todd Bowles was able to put together the #1 rushing defense in the NFL, alongside significant improvements to the pass rush as well, most notably coming from free agent addition Shaq Barrett, who led the league in sacks with 19.5, which is also a team record. While that success came along with the secondary being absolutely decimated early on in the year, the back half of 2019 actually saw a very different story, with young talents in Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting, and Carlton Davis really starting to find their footing, along with the emergence of 5th overall pick Devin White down at linebacker. In comparing the first 8 games of the season to the last 8, the Buccaneers improved their average yards allowed per game from 371.6 to 316.8, a mark of nearly 60 that would place them 7th in the NFL if they were on a 16-game pace, as well as improving their point differential from -22 in the first half of the season to +31 over the back half. There's no coincidence that that uptick in play coincided with a stretch of wins in 5 of 6 weeks before bad Jameis reared his ugly head again in the final 2 games of the season. Although, I'm definitely inclined to forgive that a little more considering he was missing his top 2 weapons and had a literal broken thumb. That defensive improvement to finish 5th overall in DVOA shows that it's grown significantly in its first year under Bruce Arians and Todd Bowles, and if it's able to avoid losing significant pieces, there's really no reason the unit can't be one of the league's most improved and entirely solid enough in 2020 to justify a playoff push. So, with that established, why would Winston be worth keeping around considering the damage his decision-making causes their wins column? The best argument would be that good quarterback play is not an easy thing to come by, and Winston is just able to play the game at a level that not many other quarterbacks can when he's actually on. And while there's essentially no changing who Jameis is at his core at this point, the history of quarterbacks within Bruce Arians' offense tells us it's very possible that Winston's interceptions could regress to a manageable mark in his second season within that system. In 3 of the 4 first seasons in which Arians implemented his scheme on an NFL offense as coordinator or head coach, including this past year with the Buccaneers, the quarterback that adopted that system has thrown for a career record in interceptions. This is especially notable in looking at a veteran Carson Palmer, who averaged 14.4 picks over 9 seasons before joining the Cardinals in 2013, where he ended up throwing 22 interceptions to 24 touchdowns. And as I mentioned before, Palmer recently did an interview talking about how Arians' system can serve as a second rookie year in many ways, with a playbook that's nearly twice as dense as that of a typical NFL offense, and much more difficult throws on average being asked of the quarterback. But with that amount of negative swing in an adjustment period, there's definitely reason to anticipate regression, especially since Palmer's second full 16-game season resulted in 4,600 yards and 35 touchdowns to just 11 interceptions en route to a 13-3 record. Growing pains are really something fully expected by Arians himself, and while it can be argued that Winston's mistakes are beyond growing pains territory, it's not really a reach to believe that any second year in a proven system provides far more potential than just wiping the slate clean entirely. In that first year, the Buccaneers had the top passing offense and the second highest total offense on Jameis' arm alone, and that's not necessarily because of losing game scripts like some will tell you, since Winston averaged over 8 attempts and 50 passing yards more in games that the Buccaneers won compared to when they lost. Just putting it simply, when you've got the best wide receiver tandem in football and a scheme that is by nature pass heavy, it's no wonder that's going to be the strength of your offense. And the law of average dictates that with that many attempts from a quarterback that takes risks already, you've signed up for turnovers at least in some capacity. But when it all boils down, beyond the arguments for and against, and the areas of improvement and regression, what is Tampa going to do with the quarterback they've already invested so heavily in trying to fix, only to be frustrated by how close he seems to greatness while simultaneously being so far away? Well, given the quiet momentum that the team built in the back half of the season, there's no reason to believe that now is the time for a rebuild, so the decision to be made ultimately comes down to whether or not Bruce Arians believes Jameis Winston can run the offense competently enough to give the team around him opportunities to win. If not, then it's definitely more worthwhile to try and soup up the positions around a younger, cheaper quarterback and then play the long game in trying to reach the Super Bowl. The talent is there with Winston, the supporting cast is definitely there, but you also have to take the risk of lighting the entire season on fire just in an attempt to set off some fireworks. But then on the opposite hand, by letting guaranteed production go and then taking a shot in the draft, you're folding and gambling again on the next few years of the franchise, a question mark that could make the surrounding talent on the team waste a great window. That is the dichotomy this team is facing. There's little question that in terms of Arians' offense and the talent of Winston combined together, you're probably not going to find a better fit in free agency or immediately in the draft regardless. So at that point, you're really looking at a matter of whether or not Winston himself is going to be worth the price tag it'll take to bring him back, especially with how many other roles also need to be addressed this offseason. Regarding Winston, Tampa has the option of a variety of tags to use, with the added possibilities of signing him to a short or long-term contract or letting him walk entirely. We obviously don't have any further information from the team at this time and likely won't for quite a while, so everything from here on out is strictly just going to be speculation. Now, Winston is reportedly asking for a contract of $30 million per year. This is insane and obviously better not happen, and I have faith that it won't. But with his base posturing that he won't settle for the franchise tag, it's looking more and more like the Bucs' ability to bring Winston back comes down to whether or not he'll accept a contract to prove himself on a shorter deal, or possibly still a tag because bluffing is a typical part of these negotiations. Even still, a franchise tag isn't exactly inexpensive either, considering it's estimated to cost the Bucs close to $27 million in the 2020 season, and you still might want to use that tag on Shaq Barrett. So at this point in the game, it's as reasonable a position as ever to hit the eject button and try to develop a quarterback while you still have the benefit of Bruce Arians as your head coach on a still improving team. And if you're asking me personally, after all I've seen and looked into in terms of scenarios, I could go either way. I'm as infuriated by Winston's lack of growth in decision making as much as the next guy. At the very least, there's gotta be competition behind him. And if he walks, I can't say I'd be too upset about that either. If Arians gets the time to choose and develop the future, I'd really trust that all the same. On the same token, and this might be a little bit of bias speaking, I think the Buccaneers are quietly in a position to turn the corner quickly if they can find any way to limit the amount of plays he goes all in on his first hand. But all of those ridiculous self-destructive tendencies really illustrate a larger point. The Bucs don't need Winston to be perfect to make a playoff run under Bruce Arians. They just need his ceiling to exceed his floor, something that was on pace to happen in 2019 before a bitter end, but we could all very well see happening in 2020 with a second year in the Arians system. Jameis has really given no reason and has no ground to put long-term demands on the table, and it's not likely he's going to find them with another team either. But if he's able to accept a reasonable contract that allows for critical re-signings and other roster building, well, that might be a biscuit worth risking for. So what does this mean in terms of our case today? Well, after all of this, your guess is still ultimately as good as mine. Regardless of whether you're a believer or a doubter in the ability of Jameis to win football games, there's one thing that is abundantly clear. We now know who Jameis Winston is as a quarterback, and we have for a while. At this stage in his career, there just isn't a realistic likelihood that he's going to magically adopt Aaron Rodgers' level of ball security, and even in a world where Winston has an MVP caliber campaign, it'll likely come along with at least some of the unbelievable mistakes that we've just come to expect. And at this stage of the game, Jameis's legacy thus far is a once-in-a-generation player that really stands without comparison, the ceiling of the best in the game, and the floor of players who were cut long, long ago. It's as if the Buccaneers were an actual pirate ship, with Jameis Winston in the form of a steady breeze that can push the team forward along to wherever it really wants to go. But at a moment's notice, that same wind can become a brutal cyclone that serves to knock them back or sink the ship just as easily as he propels it. So, I guess in the end, if the Bucs do decide to bring Winston back in 2020, their success is going to be a matter of whether or not they're ready to weather the storm.